Okay, so we just watched this video on operant conditioning and positive and negative reinforcement. Now, this is where the tricky part comes in. We've all heard of positive reinforcement before, and we've probably most of us have heard of negative punishment. But the thing is that we're used to positive being a smiley face and a negative being a frowny face. But that is not the case, right? So when we're talking about positive and negative reinforcement, we have to remember that when we're talking that something's positive, we're going to talk more in math terms. So positive is going to equal an addition to something. I'm adding, right? I'm adding a stimulus. I'm adding something to increase the behavior or decrease the behavior. So positive is talking about an addition. Then when I'm talking about something that's negative, I'm not talking frowny face. I'm talking the math issue, right? So what do we do in math when we're doing something that's negative? We subtract it. So then I'm looking at subtraction. That's going to give me something that's negative, right? So in this case, positive is always something that's adding to, negative is something that's subtracting. The other two pieces that get us kind of confused when we talk about positive reinforcement is the word itself, reinforcement. So when I'm talking about something that I want to reinforce, and if you think about a house, it has reinforcements in it, right? Or you're building a fort, or you're playing a game and you need to bring in reinforcements, you want to increase that, right? You want to increase something. So when I'm talking about reinforcing something, I want to increase the behavior or I want to continue, right? So this means that I'm doing something, the animal is doing something I want it to do, so I want to reinforce this. I want to increase or continue, right? So that's the reinforcing piece. The other part then to this is the punishment part. Now, I'm not, when you're getting punished, I want you to think about why your parents punish you or why your guardians punish you or why people get punished in general, right? If somebody goes to jail, they're getting punished for a crime. That punishment is to get them to do what? Is to get them to stop that behavior, right? So I want to decrease or I want to stop something. So when I'm talking about punishment, I'm talking about decreasing or stopping it. So these four words, because we already have associations built up into them, they become very confusing. So we have to relearn what these words mean. So when I'm talking positive in operant conditioning, I'm adding a stimulus. I'm adding something to the situation. If I'm talking negative, then I'm subtracting. I'm taking away from the situation. So that is whether or not I want to, I'm going to add or take away from the stimulus. So we're talking about the stimulus here. And then when I'm talking about reinforcing or punishing, I want to reinforce because I want to increase or continue a behavior, or I'm punishing because I want to decrease or stop a behavior. So these two words we're always talking about in relation to the behavior. So either I want the behavior to continue or I no longer want that behavior. So that's what we're going with when we talk about these four words. So now I'm going to put this into a table so we can kind of see how it all works together. And this is what was based off of that video. Do my best to draw a line. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to kind of make it to the right. I'm going to use this whole chunk. All right, so I'm there. Forgot to light the paintbrush. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about when we talk about operant conditioning, I want to talk about the stimulus. Okay, am I adding or subtracting the stimulus? So for this first box, I'm going to add a stimulus. Okay, so this first one I'm going to add. So I'm adding a stimulus. And when I'm adding something, we're referring to this as positive. Okay, so when I add it, it's positive because I'm adding. I'm doing math, right? I'm adding something to this equation. The next box over is going to be when I'm going to be negative. And in a math problem, if I'm negative, I'm going to be subtracting, right? So I'm negative. I'm going to be subtracting a stimulus. I'm going to subtract a stimulus. Okay, so I'm going to be positive. I'm adding stimuli in this column. I'm going to be negative. I'm subtracting stimuli from here. Well, and what am I subtracting or adding for? Well, I want something to do with behavior, right? So if I want to increase behavior, if I want to increase something, right, I want to bring more forces. I'm going to reinforce it, right? I'm going to make it stronger. So I'm making this behavior stronger. So I'm going to reinforce it. This then becomes positive reinforcement. All right, so positive reinforcement. So positive reinforcement. We like this. Okay, so positive reinforcement, the more you can do positive reinforcement, the better, because you're adding stimuli to increase the behavior. And ideally, you're adding something that is going to be rewarding. This is generally why we think of positive as something good, but it's not always. But so positive reinforcement. I want to increase this behavior, so I'm going to do something good. So our example then for doing something good is going to be to give a treat, right? So that would be my positive. I'm going to give a treat when my animal does something good. That's my example for positive reinforcement. Okay. So there we go. Now, if I go down, so now I'm going to be in this next box. So I've got negative because I'm subtracting, but I still have a reinforcement. So I'm taking away a stimuli because I want to reinforce the behavior. Okay, so this is going to be negative reinforcement. There's a T there. Burp. All right, so negative reinforcement. My example then, this is what he was talking about, escape training in the video. This is going to be the animal wants to get that negative. It wants that stimuli to be done, so it's going to do the behavior that you want. So how many of you guys have trained an animal to sit and you put pressure on its rump to get it to sit, right? So as soon as you push your hand on that animal's rump, its butt moves down. Is your hand continuing to move down with it? In an ideal world, no, right? Your hand pushes, then that causes the rump to move down. As soon as the rump's down, it's no longer in contact with your hand, but it's sitting down. So you're encouraging that behavior. So the animal is able to get rid of that stimuli and sit, right? So that's going to be that example. So hand is removed, an animal sits. There's a few other differences, right, when we can talk about these, but our example here is going to be ah, that hand is removed when the animal sits. Because again, the animal sits down and the pressure goes away. So it's going to want to keep that, right? Because it doesn't want the pressure of your hand on its rump. So that's why the animal's going to do that. Okay. So that's a negative reinforcer. So I'm increasing the behavior. The behavior is sitting, right? And the stimulus that's getting decreased is that pressure on the rump, because the rump goes down, it doesn't feel that pressure any longer. Okay. All right. So now we've increased behaviors by reinforcing them. We've talked about positive and negative. Now I'm going to talk about decreasing a behavior. Okay, so now I need to look at decreasing a behavior. So if I want to decrease a behavior, I want to diminish it. I want to punish it. I don't want it to happen any longer. So I'm going to punish that behavior. All right. So punishment is going to be to get away from that behavior. Okay. I want to decrease that behavior. So this is my P for punishment, but I'm going to be positive. Okay. So this is where I'm going to add a stimuli to decrease the behavior. This is where we think of a lot, just like positive reinforcement is pretty easy to think about. Positive punishment is also where we kind of get confused because we don't think of positive in this sense. But so with our positive, so this is positive punishment. Yeah. So with positive punishment, think about I'm going to add a stimulus to stop a behavior. All right. So what did I just do? Hit. It's adding. I'm adding pain. I'm adding a stimulus. I'm adding contact. I don't want the animal to do that anymore, right? So positive punishment is actually when I'm going to take up that newspaper and hit the dog on the nose. Or how many of those people that you know of, when the animal goes potty in the house, they take the animal's nose and they rub it in it, right? I'm adding a stimulus of that physical brutality to try to punish a behavior, but that doesn't always work, and that really won't work. And we'll talk about that why a little bit more as we go through these notes. But so positive punishment is when we're going to add something to make a behavior stop. Some of you may even do this with your animal. So, and it's not always a bad thing. Right, it's not always evil, it's not always mean. Some of you may have a spray bottle that you spray a dog with when the dog does something. Are you hurting the animal by putting water on its coat? No, you're not hurting the animal, but you're adding a stimulus because you want a behavior to stop. Right, you have a little jerk on a collar, you add a behavior, you add a stimuli, you want the behavior to stop. um, so that would be an example, would be your spray bottles, making a noise. So some of you may have like a loud shaker that you add that noise and then it scares the animal and it stops them from doing that behavior. So that's kind of the stuff that we're talking about. Um, so a water bottle, so water spray. Um, how many of you guys have invisible fences, right? So your animal gets shocked by the fence, and that is one of those a little bit. You add the stimulus to getting shocked, and so it wants to decrease that behavior. Um, there is like this gray area between negative reinforcement and positive punishment. So you can flip a coin almost on it. It's really about your intent of what you want to have happen. Okay. um, but this would then also be your electric fence. Okay. All right. And this is what we call, and they called in the video, um, positive punishment is avoidance training. Okay. So it's also going to be called avoidance. This is a lot of your Caesar Milan stuff, which isn't always the greatest. Because with your animals, when you're doing avoidance training and you're doing positive punishment, you're starting to elicit a kind of a fight of aggression, right? You're trying to see who's dominant and you're asserting your dominance. For some animals, that works. For some animals, it doesn't. And for some animals, you're just going to pee them off and it's not going to be effective and you're going to get into this battle. Um, so you don't always want to do that. And then your over here, we have on the other side of things that negative or subtracting. This is what we call escape training, right? Because the animal's trying to get away from that thing. So it's trying to get away from the thing, and then it's going to keep encouraging the behavior that you want. So we call this escape training. And then last, we have our negative punishment. This is actually negative punishment is ideal. Okay. So when we use negative punishment and positive reinforcement together, we have this really great kind of culmination of training with our animals. And so you can get much better rewards with positive reinforcement and negative punishment than you can with other stimuli. Okay. So this really, really helps because your animal, you're taking something away, you're taking away a stimulus to decrease the behavior. Um, so this would be our negative punishment. So again, I'm going to remove a stimuli to decrease the behavior. So this one, um, this is where an animal tries to seek out attention, right? So you have those animals that jump. Well, if we like coddle the animal, we're like, oh no, get down, get down, get down, like you're paying it attention, right? You're giving it what it wants. But versus that animal jumps on you, if you just turn your back and walk away, that animal's lost you. You've gone away. You're the stimulus, right? And you're going to walk away, and then the animal's going to stop that behavior. So that's one of the great examples of that one is that when that dog jumps, or if the dog is trying to nip and you just walk away from it. Um, Dog jumps and the owner just walks away. Now, is this easy to do? No, it's not easy to do. No one ever said training a dog or training a cat was gonna be easy, right? Nobody ever said that. But if you are able to put in that effort and that time, you absolutely can train your dog utilizing that positive reinforcement and the negative punishment techniques. Again, these are going to be far more effective and easier for you guys to handle and less behavior adverse for your animals than your positive punishment and your negative reinforcement. So these tend to kind of bring out a little bit more. Um, they could, right? They could backfire on you. They can definitely backfire on you and not always work effectively. And they're not always going to work with everybody, then, right? So, especially you'll hear about people training animals or sending them away for a few weeks and then they come home and the animal is great in training camp and now it doesn't listen to any of the humans in the house, or you are the only human in the house that animal will listen to. So you have to be wary and mindful of those things when you're training. But so this is that grid. Really, that positive reinforcement, negative punishment are the way to go when you're training your animals. You want to stay away from positive punishment and negative reinforcement. Um, it's going to happen. I used to do positive punishment without realizing I used to do positive punishment and negative reinforcement. And then I got a dog that it didn't work on. So guess what I did? I started using a lot more positive reinforcement and negative punishment. And I saw like a 180. I tried to use pinch collars on my dog, didn't work, heightened her aggression, stopped using those, went to a harness, used a lot of treats, had her work for her food, and it was amazing. And it was all positive reinforcement. So it's absolutely doable. Absolutely doable. You just have to put in the effort. Like you can't expect an animal to do something 1, 2 times, right? It takes effort. It takes 30 minutes a day, an hour a day. It takes a lot of time. Make sure you get this down. This overall concept is operant conditioning. Okay. So operant conditioning is the overall concept here. So make sure you do get this grid in your notes and you can continue to add to it as far as some examples. And then I'm going to spell electric right. All right. So get this in your notes. Keep thinking about different examples and whatnot because we'll continue to talk about it. And you will see some of these on your exam as well.